Mr. Ross, let's talk a little about what we were asking Mr. Andrew earlier. What's your take on US-China trade war having an effect, essentially, on how Beijing might be using Pyongyang as a leverage ahead of these G20 summit?
Well, one of the things that U.S. presidents, not just Donald Trump, but his predecessors as well, have struggled with is where does China factor into our dealings with North Korea and the need to address the very significant security risk that is presented by North Korea's missile as well as nuclear weapons programs. So at times, the U.S. has sought to capture China's cooperation and maybe not have been as tough on China with issues such as human rights or religious freedom or trade issues. But now we're in an environment where the United States is tough on China increasingly on these other issues, whether it's trade or human rights or sovereignty disputes in the South China Sea. And we see that U.S. policymakers are willing to criticize China for not cooperating on North Korea sanctions, for example. But we still see that President Trump continues to say that he maintains friendly relations with Xi Jinping, even Kim Jong-un. And that's typically Donald Trump's approach when he's referring to his relationship with any world leaders. So the struggle remains, but the overriding security concern needs to be addressed. And the United States ultimately is going to do whatever it has to do to address those security concerns, regardless of how China feels.
So now, the problem with the U.S. is, I understand what you're saying here, but the problem with how U.S. or more likely President Trump's policy on trying to get somebody to the negotiating table and essentially agree to his terms and conditions is that he ends up leaving very little to be negotiated, essentially cornering them. What we've seen happening in the Middle East with Iran is a perfect example of that. And now it has problems with China. But what we're seeing here is President Trump being rather relaxed with how he approaches Kim Jong-un. I mean, despite the fact that there were missile tests and despite the fact that the Hanoi summit was a complete failure, there doesn't seem to be much pressure on North Korea, or is there?
Well, that's certainly the common criticism. On the other hand, and President Trump likes to point this out, notwithstanding the recent missile tests, the long-range missile tests have temporarily ceased. Nuclear tests have ceased for a significant period of time. There has been some cooperation on searching for the remains of American soldiers from the Korean War. So there are some positives, and we have to be fair to President Trump when he cites those things, because that is the reality. The United States also maintains a very strong dialogue on North Korea issues with its security partners in Northeast Asia, which are South Korea and Japan. So there's not a lot of separation between the U.S. and its allies in the region on these issues. So there's a large number of positives that are taking place. Ultimately, though, are the sanctions going to work? Is international pressure going to work? Or will we have to return to an even stronger military posture near North Korea, including more troops in South Korea, more military exercises, for example? These are all actions that the U.S. government and the Trump administration are going to take, regardless of how China feels about protecting its ally, North Korea.